I want you to think about something for a minute. Think about the last time you picked up a Japanese chisel, or a pull saw, or maybe a hand plane you spent real money on, and it just didn't work the way you expected. Maybe the edge chipped the first time you put it to wood. Maybe the saw bound up and wandered off your line. Maybe the plane tore out a chunk of figured cherry, and you just stood there staring at it, wondering what you did wrong. I've been there, more than once. And for a long time, I assumed I was the problem. I thought my technique was off, or maybe I'd bought a tool that wasn't as good as the reviews said. Then, about 4 years ago, I had a conversation with a Japanese toolmaker at a woodworking show, and he asked me one question that changed everything. He said, "What wood are you cutting?" And when I told him hard maple and white oak, he just smiled and nodded like he'd heard it 1,000 times. What he told me next is what I'm going to share with you today, because it completely reframed how I think about every Japanese tool I own. And I'll be honest, it's probably going to change how you think about yours too. Plus, stick around toward the end, because I'll show you a dead simple test you can do with any Japanese tool to know instantly whether the problem is you, the tool, or the wood. Let's get into it. What we're really talking about today is a fundamental mismatch. Not a flaw in the tools, not a gap in your skills, but a mismatch between what Japanese tools were designed to do and what most of us are asking them to do in our shops. Once you understand this one idea, every frustration you've had with Japanese hand tools starts to make perfect sense. And more importantly, you'll know exactly what to do about it. So let me take you back to where these tools come from, because that's where the answer lives. Japan is an archipelago sitting on one of the most seismically active zones on the planet. Earthquakes are a fact of life there, and they have been for thousands of years. Wood was the dominant building material for centuries, not just for houses, but for enormous Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines, castles, and bridges. And the wood that grew abundantly across those islands was sugi, which we know as Japanese cedar or cryptomeria, and hinoki, Japanese cypress. These are softwoods, beautiful, aromatic, straight-grained softwoods with a Janka hardness rating of around 300 to 400 pounds. For comparison, hard maple is about 1,450. White oak is around 1,300. So we're talking about wood that is roughly 1/4 as hard as what most American woodworkers reach for on a regular basis. Now, here's what matters. Over centuries, Japanese toolmakers and woodworkers developed their tools in an ecosystem built entirely around these soft, predictable, cooperative species. The steel they forged, the angles they ground, the tooth patterns they cut, the way they bedded their plane blades, all of it was refined generation after generation to be perfect for sugi and hinoki. Not adequate. Perfect. These tools weren't designed to be universal. They were designed to be the absolute best possible tools for a specific family of materials. And when you use them on those materials or on similar softwoods, the results are honestly breathtaking. The problem is, most of us aren't using them on those materials. We're dropping them into hard maple and hickory and white oak and expecting the same magic. And that's where everything falls apart. Let me start with the steel, because this is where most of the heartbreak happens. Japanese chisels and plane blades are typically forged from white steel or blue steel, known in Japanese as shirogami and aogami. These steels are harder than what you'll find in most Western chisels. We're talking about Rockwell hardness ratings in the range of 62 to 67, sometimes even higher. A typical Western bench chisel sits around 58 to 61. That extra hardness means Japanese blades can take a keener edge. We're talking about an edge that is genuinely sharper than what most Western tools can achieve and hold. On soft, straight-grained cedar, that razor edge glides through the fibers like they're not even there. The shavings come off translucent. The surface left behind is polished. It's the kind of result that makes you understand why people get obsessed with these tools. But hardness and toughness are a trade-off. Always have been, always will be. The harder a steel is, the more brittle it becomes. Japanese toolmakers knew this and they accepted it, because when you're working sugi and hinoki, you don't need a tough edge. You need a keen one. The wood isn't fighting you. There's no impact resistance required, but take that same chisel, that same beautiful, keen, hard edge, and drive it into a piece of hickory with a Janka rating of 1820, and something has to give, and it won't be the hickory. I learned this the hard way with a brand new white steel chisel I'd been excited about for weeks. First mortise in a piece of hickory, I felt that sickening little crunch. Pulled the chisel out, and there it was, a tiny chip right in the center of the edge. I thought the chisel was defective. It wasn't. I was asking a scalpel to do a splitting maul's job. The edge geometry that makes Japanese chisels magical on softwood, typically ground at 22 to 25 degrees, is just too acute to survive the density and hardness of most North American hardwoods. Western chisels, ground at 25 to 30 degrees with tougher, slightly softer steel, were built for exactly that punishment. Now let's talk about saws, because this one might be even more frustrating than the chisels. Japanese pull saws, your Dozuki and Ryoba and Kataba, are engineering marvels. The blades are thinner than Western saws, sometimes as thin as 12/1000ths of an inch. The teeth are finer, often 20 to 26 teeth per inch, on a finish-cut Dozuki. And the set, which is how far the teeth are bent outward to create clearance for the blade, is narrower than what you'd find on a typical Western dovetail saw. All of this is designed for one thing: cutting soft, straight-grained wood on the pull stroke with minimal resistance, minimal waste, and maximum precision. And on sugi or hinoki or our domestic white pine, that's exactly what happens. The saw tracks beautifully, the kerf is hair-thin, and the cut surface is so clean you almost don't need to touch it. But put that same saw into a piece of dense red oak, and everything changes. The fine teeth can't clear the sawdust fast enough. The dense fibers pack into the gullets, and the saw starts to clog. The thin blade, which was an advantage in softwood because it reduced resistance, now becomes a liability because the dense wood closes the kerf and pinches the blade. The narrow set that gave you that beautiful thin cut line doesn't create enough clearance to prevent binding. I spent an entire afternoon once trying to cut dovetails in hard maple with a Dozuki, and I was convinced the saw was garbage. The teeth were skating, the blade was wandering, and I was sweating through my shirt. I almost returned it. Then, a few days later, on a whim, I grabbed the same saw and made a cut in a piece of basswood. It went through like the wood wasn't even there. The cut was perfect. The saw wasn't the problem. The maple was. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these ancient methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Kenji's Workshop, and it is a collection of 100 ancient Eastern woodworking secrets for the modern craftsman. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. Now let's get to planes, because this is where the mismatch becomes really visible. A Japanese hand plane, the kana, is a work of art. A hardwood body, usually Japanese white oak or red oak, with a blade bedded at roughly 38 to 42 degrees. That's a lower angle than most Western bench planes, which typically bed the blade at 44 to 45 degrees in a standard Bailey configuration, and can go as high as 50 or 55 degrees in a York pitch plane designed for difficult grain. That lower bedding angle on the kana is what produces those impossibly thin, translucent shavings that you see in videos. On straight-grained hinoki, the blade enters the wood at a shallow enough angle to shear the fibers cleanly, and the separate chip breaker, called the uragane, helps control the shaving without lifting the grain ahead of the cut. But here's what happens when you take that same plane to a board of figured hard maple or curly cherry. That low angle, which was an advantage on soft straight grain, now attacks the wood at an angle that's too aggressive for interlocked or reversing grain. Instead of shearing cleanly, the blade catches the grain and lifts it, pulling chunks of wood out of the surface. That's tear out, and it's not a skill problem. It's a geometry problem. I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to plane a piece of curly cherry with my kana, adjusting the chip breaker, taking lighter passes, even trying to skew the plane. Nothing worked. The tear out was relentless. Then I picked up my Western low-angle jack plane, set the bevel-up blade to an effective cutting angle of about 50 degrees, and the cherry came off in clean, smooth ribbons. Same wood, same day, same hands. Different tool designed for a different material. Once I understood the steel, the saws, and the planes, the bigger picture came into focus. There's a concept in Japanese woodworking that roughly translates to reading the wood. It means studying a board before you ever touch it with a tool, understanding which direction the grain runs, where the tension lives, how the wood wants to move. It's a beautiful and deeply practical idea, but it carries an embedded assumption that most of us miss. It assumes the wood will cooperate once you've read it correctly. And with sugi and hinoki, that assumption holds up beautifully. These species are consistent, predictable, and forgiving. The grain runs straight. The density is uniform. The fibers are soft enough to yield to a sharp edge without a fight. Now think about what most of us are working with in our shops. Hard maple with bird's eye figure going in 6 different directions. White oak with medullary rays that change the cutting resistance every quarter inch. Mesquite with a silica content that dulls edges in minutes. Purple heart that's so dense it practically rings like metal when you tap it. Walnut with wild swirling grain around every knot and crotch. These are not cooperative woods. They are beautiful, yes. They make stunning furniture, but they fight back. And the techniques that were developed for a world of soft, straight, predictable grain simply don't translate directly to these species without adaptation. Let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years, things I used to do myself that once I recognized them, completely changed my results. The first pattern is blaming the tool and buying a more expensive one. I did this twice with Japanese chisels before I figured out what was actually going on. I chipped my first one and assumed it was a cheap tool. Bought a better one. Chipped that one too. Turns out a $300 chisel chips on hickory just as fast as a $90 chisel. The steel is the same class. The problem was never the price point. The second pattern is assuming all hand tools are interchangeable across wood species. Most of us grew up with the idea that a chisel is a chisel, a saw is a saw. But that's like saying a Formula One car and a pickup truck are both vehicles. Technically true, but you wouldn't take the Formula One car down a logging road. Japanese tools are precision instruments tuned for specific conditions. Treating them like general-purpose tools is the fastest way to get frustrated. The third pattern is forcing Japanese technique on Western hardwoods without adjusting anything. I see this all the time. Someone watches a beautiful video of a Japanese craftsman planing hinoki, then goes to their shop and tries to replicate it on a board of ash. When it doesn't work, they assume their technique is wrong. Their technique might be fine. The wood is just asking for a different approach. The fourth pattern, and this is the saddest one, is giving up on Japanese tools entirely. I've talked to woodworkers who bought a beautiful set of Japanese chisels, had a bad experience on the wrong species, put them in a drawer, and never touched them again. That's a tragedy because those tools have genuine magic in them. They just need the right dance partner. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This is something that completely changed how I evaluate any Japanese tool, whether I just bought it or I'm pulling it out after months of not using it. Before you judge any Japanese chisel, saw, or plane, test it on a piece of straight-grained white pine or basswood. I keep a few cut-offs of each in my shop specifically for this purpose. Take your chisel and pare across the end grain of that white pine. The edge should glide through without any resistance, and the surface should be glassy smooth. Take your Dozuki and make a crosscut. It should track perfectly with almost no effort. Take your kana and set it for a light shaving. You should be able to pull a translucent ribbon off the face of that basswood that you can read a newspaper through. If the tool performs beautifully on softwood but struggles on your hardwood project, you now know the truth. The tool is working exactly as it was designed to work. The wood is the variable, not the tool, and not you. This one test has saved me more frustration than any sharpening jig or technique video ever has. One more thing before I let you go. I spent a long time gathering the best ancient Eastern woodworking methods I have come across, and I put them all into a book called Kenji's Workshop. 100 techniques that most modern woodworkers have never seen, with step-by-step photos and clear explanations you can actually follow in your shop. Scan the QR code on screen right now, or grab it from the first link in the description. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next one.